Pension reform stuns the State House, and Governor Quinn's almost got a running mate. We'll talk about that and more next on Capitol View. Hello and welcome back to Capitol View. I'm your host this week, John Patterson, the state government editor for the Arlington Heights-based Daily Herald. We've had an interesting week. We'll explain how it takes 2 weeks to find a lieutenant governor, but just 10 hours to pass pension reform. And here to help me talk about it is Melissa Hahn, the State House Bureau Chief for the Illinois Radio Network. Melissa, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And this is the show Charlie's been waiting a lifetime for, the pension reform special. Charlie Wheeler from the University of Illinois at Springfield, who in a previous life was a State House reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times and has been dying to talk about pension reform forever. So Charlie, it's only a half-hour show. Keep that in mind today. So on Wednesday, those who got to the Capitol early quickly found that they needed to go to a House committee because House Speaker Michael Madigan had chosen that moment to unfurl his sweeping pension reform plan that over the next 35 years could save taxpayers $100 to $150 billion and will potentially forever change retirement in the public sector in Illinois, dramatically increasing retirement ages and generally reducing the how much people will get in their pensions. So Charlie, give us a rundown and we'll go from there.
Well, this is probably the most significant reform in the pension system that's occurred certainly in my memory, which goes back a ways. It basically, as you indicated, it increases the retirement age, and it says the standard retirement age will now be 67 years instead of as low as 55 in cases for some state workers. And the benefit calculation will be made at a way that will amount to reduced benefits in the future. The way it works now, the day you retire, you get a pension based on your years of service, and then that pension is increased by 3% a year, and the 3% is added into the base when the calculation occurs the next year, so it's compounded. This will say that the pension you get on the day you retire will increase each year by 1/2 of the inflation rate or up to a maximum of 3%, and that calculation will be done each year on the pension you got the day you retired as opposed to adding in the costs. It will also be calculated using a longer stretch of your earning history so that the final salary amount will be lower in most cases than it would have been under the current system. And the net result is that, as you indicated, calculations from the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability are that over the long haul, this will save the state anywhere from $110 million, I saw one estimate, and as you said, depending on what assumptions you make, much more than that. And so it really is a significant reform. It doesn't apply to current employees. It will apply to people, assuming that Governor Quinn signs the bill, apply to new hires after January 1st, and it will cover not only the state pension systems for state workers, university professors, and other employees like myself, and public school teachers, but also all municipal employees with, I believe, the exception of policemen and firemen. And if I remember correctly, during debate on this measure last night, or well, it would have been a Wednesday night in the state Senate, there was interchange to the effect that the negotiations are ongoing and there is a plan to also apply similar changes to the pension systems for downstate firefighters and police officers. So as I say, it is a huge change and it is really significant. And one of the things that had me scratching my head in the aftermath of this is that there were some people who were saying, this is nothing, this is just, this is just window dressing. And I'm thinking to myself, where have these people been? What kind of math do they use? Because this really is a dramatic change.
I should point out, like, as I said, Speaker Madigan unleashed this on Wednesday morning. Shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning, I think was when the committee started debating it. And by 10 o'clock that night, it had passed not only that committee, the House, the Senate committee, and the Senate. And now the next step will be to have Governor Pat Quinn sign it. And Quinn has said he will. He just wants to make sure, in a 10 hours to pass a legislation that deals with a 50-year-old problem, if not longer, that they didn't get anything heinously wrong that they can't simply fix with any follow-up legislation. But that was, it was a stunning example. Melissa, I don't know at what point you picked up on this and what
I
you're...
took a phone call in the office and missed the entire thing. No. Yeah, we came into the office, yes. We came into the office and heard, oh, hey, Madigan's going to speak about his pension plan. And, that's interesting. And yes, the next thing we knew, it was going to go all the way through. And when some of the senators had explained, oh yeah, we're going to try to run this all the way through tonight, and I thought, well, of course you do, because for example, some of the unions, including the teachers' unions, are not happy about this. The longer they take to debate this issue and let people think about it and go through the details, the more angry those union folks are going to be. And at Thursday, in speaking to Governor Pat Quinn, who had a news conference about the pension bill, was asked, do you expect any political backlash? And while he kind of danced around it, he said that he has to side with the taxpayers, although he will listen to groups. But you know that the unions are certainly not happy. The press releases were flying all over the place, how this will hurt recruiting for teachers, et cetera, how it's unfair, how state government officials tend to get whatever they want, and then they're going to try to balance the budget on the backs of rank and file state lawmakers and teachers. So, but it went so fast, it's a done deal. But it was amazing how quickly that went through. And I had posted on Facebook that the speed of government is lightning fast when everyone wants it to be. Otherwise, it's as slow as a snail. But it was really a surprise.
I'll go over a few more of the provisions, and if there's anything that I leave out, just jump in. But because there is so much stuff in it, as we talked about you would have to work until you're 67 in order to collect a full pension. One of the questions posed by one of the Springfield Republican lawmakers was, well, what if someone gets hired at 20 or 22, works 40 years, has maxed out the salary schedule that they're on in the union, what are they supposed to do? Because they're not 67 yet. And the answer was they can do what anybody else would do. They can quit, go get another job for a few years, and when they turn 67, they can collect their pension. There was not a lot of political correctness and soothing of political fears in this. So you wouldn't be able to collect a pension until you're 67 unless you want a discounted pension of about 30%, then you could start collecting at 62. In addition, and this wouldn't apply to most state workers, but superintendents would see a big reduction in a lot of high-end university, hospital types, and those sorts. Their pensions, the pensions will be based on a maximum salary of $106,800. You can still make more, but your pension will be based on that maximum, and that is that's the maximum salary that you pay into Social Security. A lot of this stuff is set up to mirror or model Social Security changes, which also kind of rebuts some of the criticism. Is that if this is because people who support it can say, well, look, if this is good enough for everybody else in the world, why should you get anything different? There is, Charlie mentioned the cost of living changes, and there is
there's that double dipping
the
provision. The sort of double dipping provision, as I call it.
Double dipping will say that you're free to work a state job, get a pension, and then go to work for another entity of government, but you won't be able to collect your pension while you're collecting your salary. You'll have to forego your pension until you retire from that second job, and then you can collect both pensions, but it's to cut down on people getting pensions and salaries from the government at the same time. The I suppose, catch in all of this, as Charlie mentioned, it doesn't apply to anybody that works for government today or tomorrow or anytime up to January 1. You could get hired on December 31st, I suppose, and you're still in the existing system. And so therefore a lot of this stuff doesn't really come into effect for 30, 40, 45 years down the road. The prospects of everyone was talking about, you're going to have 67-year-old kindergarten teachers, and is that really what you want? That seems almost cruel at some point. And my parents are teachers, so I can relate. But the argument is you're not going to have that 67, a 22-year-old graduating from college this next May and going to work for a school district would be the first person that would be required to work until he or she is 67. So you've got 45 years to debate whether this is cruel and unusual, and I suspect at around year 30, some wonderful, promising politician will rise up in Springfield and say, we should have an early retirement plan for these people.
Oh, sure. Yeah, because this is a dramatic change, but it's not written in stone in the sense that it can never, ever, ever be changed. I mean, they could, later on this session, should they choose to do so, they could repeal the whole thing. I don't think that's going to happen because this really is a significant way to address one of the major problems facing the state. I think in fairness, though, to public workers, there's a lot of sentiment that, well, you see these superintendents and they're getting these these raises that give them, hundreds of thousands of dollars in pension benefits. That's not what the average teacher gets. The average for a teacher is something like $25,000, and teachers do not get Social Security. And so it's not the folks at the bottom. To me, the analogy would be everybody gets upset when these titans of finance who tank the economy get million-dollar bonuses for their shrewdness, and then saying, oh, those guys are bad. And that teller there in the bank, she's probably getting more than she ought to too. I mean, there's just a disconnect between the reality of the people who do the work and the folks up on the top who have the titles.
Well, and for example, I think COGFA, the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, indicated that the average state government worker pension, and I read this awfully fast, so I hope I remember it correctly, but I think it was average state worker, the pension is $26,000 a year. Mm-hmm. You're not talking about folks who have maxed out or surpassed that $106,000 a year level. Most state workers, and this number is old, the average state worker salary hit about $55,000 a year, and that included benefits. So, when you hear a lot of news stories about the folks who are making $200,000, some superintendents who, I think one was making, I figured it out to be $350,000. Wow, that's not your average state worker. So I think the cap goes a long way to help folks sell this plan, because in a day and age, as Charlie said, when we're hearing about all these financial houses and all these CEOs making multi-million-dollar bonuses on top of their multi-million-dollar salaries, people just don't have much tolerance for a cushy pension for most anyone. And this starts to reduce that, at least in terms of lawmakers. And I was surprised to see how popular it was, because doesn't it also include lawmakers and judges?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a group right there that I would think would not be happy about that cap.
It's for future lawmakers.
Well, future, that's true. So they can.
What's in it for me? Everything's fine.
Well, but in a sense, this is for future teachers too.
Yes.
And the teachers' unions are very upset about it. And the AFSCME and the other unions that represent state employees, they're very upset about it too. They don't want a two-tiered system. They're concerned about bringing in a second class of people that maybe you won't be able to hire the same quality people. And one thing that occurred to me thinking about it, if you look at the history of public employee labor organizations in their contract negotiations with the public body, one factor in the total compensation package has always been the value of the benefits, the health care and the pension. And so historically, public employee unions have been willing to accept less in terms of salary in return for benefits. And now, if the benefits for teachers, for example, in the future are going to be much less, and by the way, they're going to pay the same percentage of their salary that they pay now towards those benefits, then maybe there'll be more demands on the wage side. So maybe school districts and the state will save money over time, but in the immediate term, they may have to pay more to hire people.
And that was, Speaker Madigan was asked at that when he was presenting this, aren't you concerned that this is going to hurt the ability to attract quality state workers and attract quality young people into the teaching profession? And his argument back was, it's still going to be a pretty good deal for this marketplace. That compared to what most people are seeing in their lives, non-government employees are seeing in their lives, any pension, any guaranteed retirement annuity is better than what a lot of people get, and when everyone else has seen pay cuts and so forth.
Well, and in a time of high unemployment, that's true, but one would hope certainly that at some point the economy rebounds and we get back to a growth pattern where the unemployment goes down, and maybe you do have to do a little extra to get people to take your jobs.
And this does, as you said, this does set up where however many decades down the road, or just a couple years, you can quickly start to curry favor with unions or whatever else by starting to undo this and going back if the economy is doing better and the pension fund is in theory better funded.
But one thing to bear in mind is that although this will save us a lot of money over the long haul, we still are faced with the difficulty of the fact that the benefits that people are entitled to today are short by around $75 billion of the money that's likely to be there to pay for them. And the interest on that grows at about $6.5 billion a year. So even if this reform would have abolished pensions altogether, we still have to deal with the unfunded liability, which results from decades of governors, Republican and Democrat, legislators, Republican and Democrat, choosing to spend money on current programs, chiefly education, healthcare, human services, rather than sock it away to pay somebody's pension 20, 30 years down the road.
Well, if this is going to save $150 billion, why don't we just recognize it now? We're $75 billion ahead in the black.
And as a matter of fact, the current law that requires specific amounts to be paid into the pension funds each year, so that by the year 2045, the pension funds will be 90% fully funded, and it's a law that requires or provides for the unfunded liability to keep growing until sometime in the 2030s, and then it'll start to go down. If I'm not mistaken, this legislation also provides for a recalculation of the formulas used to determine this funding level, which will have the impact of saving $300 to $500 million of what the requirement will be for this year.
That doesn't get us out of the
Oh, no,
total
it still
hole,
doesn't get
but
us out of the hole.
it's something.
Well,
Yeah.
and Quinn said on Thursday that he wanted to use a conservative estimate and only take into consideration about $300 million for this next fiscal year. I was kind of surprised by that, because he probably could have pushed that double easily and probably gotten away with it.
We'll see how conservative he is in May.
Well,
Well,
yes.
and what they did last year was they basically borrowed $3.5 billion instead of paying anything.
To get into the politics of this a little bit, the proposal passed the House and Senate overwhelmingly. It does put Republicans in a bit of a trick corner here, because in the House you ended up with Republicans who had been demanding pension reform were suddenly left saying, oh, this is happening too fast, and could we take this home for a week and have some town hall meetings and feel everybody out for what they think about this? And of course the answer was no, we're voting now, and by and large they mostly voted for it. And in the Senate, the Republicans were far more praising of it, and again, it passed overwhelmingly. To my mind, the interesting thing was that in a year that's supposed to be bad for Democrats, you suddenly have Democrats almost running to the right, because when you look at it, at least in the governor's race, so you've got the public employee unions who are not going to be happy with Governor Quinn. Well, what's the alternative? Senator Brady, who pretty much wants to put everyone in a 401k type system, which the unions would see as much worse. So, no matter how much they don't like this, what's the alternative that's going to be offered to them come November? And that's kind of the catch politically that I see in this. And
Well, I see it as a standoff in the House between Mike Madigan, and the House Democratic leader, Speaker of the House, and Tom Cross, the Republican minority leader. And I've used this analogy before. It's like two kids in the junior high playground. They're chest to chest, and neither of them is going to budge. Madigan won't raise taxes unless Republicans are for it, and Cross won't let any Republican vote for it. And the Republican theory is that we'll be able to, if the state implodes, it's the Democrats' fault. They're in charge. If taxes are raised, the Democrats raised your taxes. So they think they can win either way. One of the demands that the Republicans have been making all along was, we need pension reform. And so suddenly Madigan says, okay, boys, here's your pension reform. What are you going to do now? So in a sense, he called their bluff.
And it's interesting, just in the last 48 hours at the Capitol, you had pension reform, a model voucher program for public schools advance, ending the residency requirement for Chicago teachers, tax breaks for small businesses that create jobs. If you stripped out the names, you would think this was in the mid-90s and the suburban Republicans were still ruling the state house. The fact that it's longtime Chicago Democratic bosses who are now pushing through all of these business and, in theory, kind of Republican-friendly initiatives in an election year is somewhat stunning, and it's going to be, it sets up a very interesting campaign tactic.
When did structural reform and savings become a Democrat plank? When did that happen? Well, apparently this week at the Capitol. And it was interesting.
Wednesday morning, I
yes,
believe. Exactly.
Starting at about, 10:05. As I understand it, and I was not in this committee, but the two of the House Republicans that were on that committee voted against it because they have a lot of state workers in their union. So I got a big kick out of that the Republicans voted in committee against reform. There was another Republican that did vote for it. But two of the Republicans voted against it and all the Democrats voted for it.
But see, I would say
Dogs and cats living
what they were
together.
doing is they were voting the interests of their district. By the same token,
of course.
Were there a tax increase bill to be up there, I would think they would vote for it if their leader were to allow them to, because it's for the best interests of their district. I think there are probably maybe as many as a dozen Republicans in the House who would vote for an income tax increase because they look at what the impact without one is on their schools, particularly if they have university, or their state facilities, particularly if they have a prison. For them, that's a good vote. It's something that helps their district. And so to me, it's analogous to something that happened back in, if you're talking about the 90s, back in the 90s when the governor of the state, Jim Edgar, wanted income tax increase for education. The Republican leadership from the suburbs, Senator Phillip and Representative Daniels, both from DuPage County, decided they were going to be against it. The bill came up for a vote in the House, and there were a number of Republicans who went against their leadership to support that bill, simply because it helped their school districts. And so I think there's that same dynamic at work, and it'll be interesting to see, should Madigan say, okay, now we're going to run a tax increase and we'll see how you Republicans vote on it. We've done pension reform, which is what you wanted.
And since they're faced with the Quinn's threat to lay off 17,000 some teachers across the state, the Illinois State Police looking at cutting 464 troopers, plus not filling positions that troopers retire from in the next year, and cutting 5 offices, one of which just happens to be in Des Plaines and covers the Chicago area. There are a lot of reasons for them to vote for it.
Well, and the significance in the Chicago area is that the state troopers now patrol the expressways, and under this reorganization plan with reduced ranks, it'd be up to the local and county, to the sheriff and the local communities to patrol the expressways. The state police would have no presence there.
Local control has also been a hallmark of the Democratic Party in Illinois.
Dogs and cats.
As much as I would love to talk about pensions, we do have some other events before we run out of time. This weekend, the Illinois Democratic Party will be getting together to, in theory, they tell us, pick Pat Quinn's running mate. The governor, who hasn't said who he wants yet, claims that he will do so before that Saturday committee hearing. The latest front runner, and by all accounts that I can tell, seems to be the favorite, is Susan Garrett, a state senator from Lake Forest, who oddly enough came to the General Assembly initially to fill the seat. She won the seat when Corinne Wood left the House to go run for lieutenant governor on the Republican ticket with George Ryan. But Garrett did not run in the primary, but she apparently has been sought out by the Quinn people and is gung-ho about it. And from all, she would bring a suburban presence, a female presence. She is somewhat of a liberal, though more of a pocketbook issue type with her suburban community, and is not on board with Quinn's tax increase, at least not yet. So I think it's probably likely she'll get it. Charlie, your thoughts on what she brings to the ticket? And
Well, I think you pointed out that the main things that she brings. She is a woman. She's been an effective legislator, and she also is from the suburbs. And if you look at the Republicans, they have two downstaters running. One for lieutenant governor is relatively unknown, and the second for governor, Senator Brady, is someone who did abysmally in the primary in the suburbs, got less than 6% of the vote. And his challenge is to relate to suburban voters, to sell himself to suburban voters. And having a woman from the suburbs on the Democratic ticket, I think helps Pat Quinn with both female voters and also suburban voters. And it is a contrast in lieutenant governor candidates between someone who has shown herself to be a skilled legislator and a successful campaigner, and somebody else who basically, no offense, used his family's money to buy himself the nomination.
Well, and she also was active in ethics reform. So I think that gives her maybe small but added dimension that might attract some voters from the strict standpoint that Quinn pushed for ethics reform and Susan Garrett was doing the same thing, and she was not on Speaker Madigan's favorite list on several issues, not just ethics but others, and that itself might bring in a few votes too.
with that, we're out of time this week. I would note that you can now watch Capitol View on YouTube, and where you can also catch other Network Knowledge produced programs. And again, I'm John Patterson, and I'd like to thank Melissa and Charlie for joining me this week. Capitol View will be back next week, so please tune in then. Thanks a lot for watching.